All right, so are you ready to go down this rabbit hole? You sent us this audio clip. Alex Jones goes CRAZY globalist agenda exposed.mp3. And we're going to go on a deep dive with this thing.
Yeah.
For anyone who may not know,
Okay.
Alex Jones is a radio host and commentator who's known for his, shall we say, unique takes on world events.
Yeah.
Often leaning into conspiracy theories.
Yeah. Well, and this clip in particular, I think, is interesting because he really dives headfirst into this idea of a globalist agenda.
Okay.
This concept of a powerful shadowy force controlling the world
Right.
from behind the scenes.
Okay, so let's unpack that a little bit.
Right.
What exactly does Jones mean by globalism?
Right.
And why do you think this idea resonates with some people?
Yeah, so in this clip, he's using globalism as kind of this catch-all term for everything that he sees as threatening individual liberty and national sovereignty. He points to things like Brexit, the influence of the European Union, and international trade deals as evidence of this agenda.
And he even throws out some pretty wild claims about, big financial institutions like Goldman Sachs.
Oh, yeah.
Trying to crash the economy.
Totally.
It seems like he's really trying to tap into people's economic anxieties.
Right.
What's the strategy there?
I mean, that's a really good point. By suggesting that these powerful forces are deliberately manipulating the economy to their advantage,
Right.
he creates this sense of fear and powerlessness among his listeners. And I think that makes them more likely to embrace his solutions, which often involve rejecting, traditional institutions and figures of authority.
So if globalism is the enemy in this narrative,
Right.
who does Jones see as the hero?
Yeah, well, that's where Donald Trump comes in.
Yep.
Jones really portrays Trump as this almost mythical figure, a lone warrior fighting against this globalist establishment.
Yeah.
He praises Trump for withdrawing from the Trans-Pacific Partnership Trade Agreement, appointing figures like Jeff Sessions and Steve Bannon, and challenging institutions like the State Department.
It's interesting because, in the past, Jones has been critical of other political figures, even those within the Republican Party.
Yeah.
Why this sudden shift to almost hero worship for Trump?
I think it's a clever strategy because by framing Trump as this anti-globalist savior, he creates a very clear-cut good versus evil narrative.
Right.
And this appeals to people who crave these simple explanations and who feel disillusioned with the complexities of modern politics.
Okay, so it's really about simplifying things down to us versus them almost.
Exactly.
Okay.
Yeah.
And it's not just Trump who's on the side of good.
Right.
In Jones's view, Jones also talks about InfoWars.
Yes.
His own media platform,
of course,
as being this lone beacon of truth, fighting against this globalist agenda.
Yeah.
What's he trying to achieve with this constant self-promotion?
I think by positioning InfoWars as this only source of reliable information, he creates this sense of exclusivity and belonging among his followers. He's telling them that they are the chosen few who have access to the truth, while everyone else is being misled by the mainstream media.
Which he claims is part of the globalist conspiracy.
Right, exactly. Which he claims is part of this big globalist conspiracy.
So he's really creating this us versus them mentality.
Exactly. And this is a hallmark of a lot of extremist rhetoric. It's dividing the world into two camps, those who are with us and those who are against us.
He gets it a lot easier to justify extreme actions.
Exactly. It makes it much easier to justify those extreme actions and to demonize your opponents.
He also makes some pretty startling claims about a so-called deep state working against Trump, particularly within the State Department.
Right.
He even mentions specific individuals like Rex Tillerson and Paul Ryan. Can you shed some light on this deep state idea and why it resonates with some people?
Well, this idea of a deep state or a shadow government pulling strings behind the scenes is a recurring theme in a lot of these conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
It taps into this fear that we all kind of have, I think, of these hidden, unelected powers controlling our lives.
Yeah.
It's appealing because it offers a simple explanation for complex events.
Okay.
And allows people to feel like they've uncovered this secret truth that, the mainstream is trying to hide.
And he specifically targets the State Department.
Yeah.
What's going on there?
Well, by focusing on the State Department, Jones taps into these anxieties about foreign influence and the erosion of American sovereignty. He portrays the State Department as being infiltrated by these globalist sympathizers who are actively working to sabotage Trump's agenda.
Wow.
And by naming specific individuals, he makes that threat feel more real and immediate.
So it's all about creating fear and paranoia.
Exactly. And this is where I think his rhetoric becomes particularly dangerous. By constantly stoking fear and distrust of institutions and individuals, he undermines faith in democracy
Right.
and creates this climate where violence and unrest become more likely.
There's a lot to unpack here.
Yeah.
It seems like Jones is using this whole arsenal of rhetorical techniques
Yeah.
to create a compelling,
Definitely.
albeit deeply disturbing
Well,
narrative.
he blends elements of populism, nationalism, conspiracy theories
Right.
to create this really potent message
Right.
that appeals to people who feel alienated, powerless, and angry.
It's really fascinating in a kind of terrifying way to see how he weaves together these disparate threads into a cohesive narrative. It's like he's creating his own alternative reality.
And that's precisely what makes him so dangerous, I think. He's not just offering an alternative viewpoint, he's
Wow.
creating an entirely separate world,
Right.
complete with its own heroes and villains and mythology.
It's easy to dismiss him as a fringe figure,
Sure.
but clearly his message is resonating with a significant number of people.
Absolutely. And that's what we need to understand. We need to figure out why these narratives are so appealing
Right.
and how we can counter them with messages that are based on facts, reason, and empathy.
We've only just scratched the surface here.
Hmm.
Let's dig a bit deeper. In the audio clip, Jones claims that the globalists have a specific agenda and are actively working to achieve it. What exactly does he claim they are trying to do?
He paints this very dark picture,
Okay.
claiming that they're trying to achieve what he calls a new world order.
Uh-huh.
And this, according to Jones, involves eroding national sovereignty, centralizing power in the hands of this, global elite,
Right.
and ultimately controlling every aspect of our lives.
Wow, that sounds pretty intense.
Yeah.
Does he give any specifics about how they're supposedly doing this?
He points to several things.
Yeah.
For one, he claims that international organizations like the United Nations and the World Economic Forum are tools of this globalist agenda,
Okay.
using their influence to push policies that benefit the elite at the expense of ordinary people.
He also seems to have a particular obsession with economic manipulation.
Oh, yeah.
He repeatedly warns about the globalists' supposed plans to crash the economy,
Right.
claiming they are deliberately manipulating financial markets
Mm-hmm.
to enrich themselves. Is there any truth to that?
Well, it's important to remember that Jones really thrives on fear and speculation.
Okay.
While there's no doubt that economic inequality is a real issue,
Uh-huh.
and that some individuals and corporations do engage in unethical or even illegal financial practices,
Right.
Jones really takes it to a whole other level.
So he's taking legitimate concerns and twisting them
Mhm.
to fit his narrative.
He's preying on people's anxieties about their financial
Yeah.
security,
Right.
making them believe that this shadowy cabal is deliberately trying to impoverish them.
He even goes as far as to say that these globalists view ordinary people as roaches
Oh, yeah.
who are consuming their resources and need to be eliminated.
I know, it's really disturbing.
That's pretty disturbing.
And this kind of dehumanizing language is extremely dangerous.
Right.
It creates this climate of fear and hatred,
Yeah.
making it easier to justify violence against those who are perceived as enemies.
And of course, Jones presents himself and his followers as the only ones who can stop this supposed globalist takeover.
Yes.
He constantly talks about the importance of waking people up and fighting back against the agenda.
Yeah.
What's the psychology behind this kind of rhetoric?
I think it taps into this very primal human instinct, the need to feel in control, in a world that often feels very chaotic and unpredictable.
Right.
Jones offers this sense of order and purpose.
Yeah.
He tells his followers that they have this crucial role to play in this, cosmic battle between good and evil,
Right.
and that by joining his movement, they can actually make a difference.
He also frequently references historical events and figures to bolster his claims.
Yes.
Drawing parallels between the current situation and past instances of tyranny and oppression. For example, he frequently mentions the European Union's attempts to exert control over its member states, comparing it to the rise of Nazi Germany.
Yeah, well, this use of historical analogy is a very common tactic among these conspiracy theorists.
Right.
It allows them to tap into these deep-seated fears and anxieties, making their claims seem more credible and urgent.
But isn't he distorting history to fit his narrative?
Absolutely. He's cherry-picking events and figures from the past,
Okay.
ignoring context and nuance to create this very simplistic black and white worldview.
It's interesting that he's so focused on Europe.
Yeah.
Is that just because of the EU, or is there something else going on there?
Well, Europe has long been kind of a target of these far-right conspiracy theories.
Yeah.
It's often portrayed as this hotbed of liberalism, multiculturalism, and
Mm.
globalist influence, all things that Jones and his followers vehemently oppose.
So it's like he's holding up Europe as a cautionary tale, a warning of what could happen to America if it succumbs to this globalist agenda.
Exactly. And this fear of America losing its identity and sovereignty is a powerful motivator for a lot of Jones's followers.
In that vein, he frequently uses this term, culture of death, to describe what he sees as the globalist agenda,
Yeah.
claiming that they are promoting abortion, euthanasia, and other policies that he believes are designed to depopulate the planet.
This is a classic example of using emotionally charged language to demonize your opponents.
Right.
By framing these issues in such stark terms,
Okay.
Jones taps into these deep-seated fears about moral decay and the erosion of traditional values.
And again, it creates that clear division between us and them.
Right. He's essentially saying, we are the defenders of life and they are the agents of death.
Right.
And this kind of rhetoric can be very dangerous as it dehumanizes the opposition and makes it easier to justify violence against them.
He also seems to have this strange fascination with Russia.
Yeah.
He often praises Russia's rejection of globalism, claiming that they were the first to recognize the threat it posed,
Right.
and that they are now a model for other nations to follow.
Well, this alignment with Russia is a relatively new phenomenon among these far-right figures like Jones. It's partly driven by a shared opposition to liberalism and globalism, but it's also about this admiration for Russia's perceived strength and authoritarianism.
It's a bit ironic considering Russia's history of human rights abuses and its current aggression towards Ukraine.
It is ironic, but for Jones and his followers, Russia really represents this bulwark against the perceived decadence and weakness of the West.
He also doesn't shy away from using humor and entertainment to make his message more appealing and engaging.
Yeah.
He often uses exaggerated language, mocking impersonations of his opponents, and makes outlandish claims that are clearly meant to be entertaining rather than factual.
I mean, this is a clever tactic because it makes him seem more relatable and less threatening. You know, people might be more willing to listen to someone who makes them laugh, even if they don't agree with everything they say.
He's packaging these extremist views in a more palatable format.
Exactly. And this is what makes him so dangerous.
Okay.
He's able to reach a wider audience and to normalize his extreme views by presenting them in a way that is both entertaining and engaging.
It's clear that Jones is a master manipulator.
Yeah.
He knows how to push people's buttons and to exploit their fears and anxieties.
Right.
But is there a limit to how far he'll go? Does he ever acknowledge the potential consequences of his rhetoric?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, he constantly rails against this so-called globalist agenda.
Right.
But does he ever really offer any alternatives?
Yeah. What does he actually want?
That's where it gets a bit tricky because while he's great at, pointing fingers and stoking fear, he's much less clear about concrete solutions.
Right.
He often talks about a return to traditional values, individual liberty, national sovereignty. But, those are pretty broad concepts.
So it's more about what he's against, what he's for.
Exactly. It's about tearing down the existing system, which he sees as corrupt and beyond repair.
Right.
But what he would replace it with is much more vague.
That makes sense. He's really playing on people's frustration and anger.
Yeah.
But he's not offering any real answers.
Right. And that's a common thread we see in a lot of these extremist movements.
Okay.
They're very good at mobilizing people against a common enemy.
Right.
But they often struggle to articulate a positive vision for the future.
He does seem to constantly reiterate this idea that we already won.
Oh, yeah.
And that the globalists are already defeated, but they're trying to convince us otherwise so that we'll give up.
Right.
I'm not sure I understand that logic.
It's a powerful psychological tactic.
Okay.
By telling his followers that victory is inevitable, he keeps them motivated and engaged.
Right.
It creates the sense of momentum and makes them feel like they're part of something bigger than themselves.
But it also seems like a way to avoid accountability.
Oh, totally.
If they've already won, then any failures or setbacks can be attributed to the enemy's deception rather than their own shortcomings.
It's a way to deflect criticism and maintain a sense of infallibility.
And he loves to portray Trump as being completely surrounded by enemies, but somehow still managing to fight back and, deliver bombs on the globalists.
Yes.
It seems like he's trying to create this image of Trump as this lone warrior
Right.
battling against impossible odds.
It's that classic underdog narrative.
Yeah.
It appeals to people who feel like they've been marginalized or ignored by the system.
Okay.
It gives them this hero to root for someone who's fighting on their behalf.
But it also creates this dangerous dynamic.
Yes.
It makes it seem like violence is the only way to achieve victory.
Absolutely. When you portray your opponents as enemies who are bent on destroying everything you hold dear,
Right.
it becomes much easier to justify those extreme actions.
So where does this all leave us? What are the long-term implications of Jones's rhetoric?
Well, I think one clear consequence is this erosion of trust in institutions and experts. You know, when you constantly tell people that everything is a lie, that the media is fake, that scientists are shills,
Right.
it creates this climate of suspicion and paranoia.
And that makes it much harder to have, rational conversations
Right.
to find common ground.
Exactly. It also makes people more susceptible to misinformation and conspiracy theories, which further reinforces their existing biases.
We've seen this play out in recent years with the rise of QAnon and other fringe movements.
Yeah, absolutely.
Jones may not be directly responsible for these groups,
Right?
but he certainly helped to create the conditions for their emergence.
He's been incredibly successful at mainstreaming these ideas and making them part of the political discourse.
So what can we do about it? Is there any way to counter this kind of rhetoric and to bring people back from the brink?
It's a tough challenge, but I don't think it's impossible. We need to start by recognizing the problem and understanding how it works.
Okay. We need to be more critical of the information that we consume.
Right.
And we need to be willing to challenge our own biases.
We also need to be more empathetic and understanding towards those who have been drawn into these movements.
Yes.
It's easy to dismiss them as crazy or stupid,
Right.
but that's not going to help.
We need to find ways to engage with them, to listen to their concerns, and to offer alternative perspective.
It's a long and difficult process.
It is.
But it's essential if we want to preserve our democracy and to create a more just and equitable society.
Well said. This deep dive into the world of Alex Jones has been eye-opening, to say the least.
Yeah, it has.
It's a stark reminder of the power of words and the dangers of unchecked extremism.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's also a reminder that we all have a role to play in safeguarding truth, reason, and civil discourse.
And that perhaps the best antidote to fear and division is compassion and understanding.
Well, thank you for joining us on this deep dive. We hope you found it insightful and thought-provoking. And remember, be critical, be curious, and be kind.